Welcome back to the World Intellectual Property Forum here in Bangkok. I'm Mark Laudi from PitchMark. And we're now going to be focusing on the big headline stories that you might have caught during the time of COVID. How many movies did you go and see in the cinema while we were all in lockdown? The answer is, of course, none. So what did the big studios do in order to get money? Well, we're going to find out from Professor Kevin J. Greene from Los Angeles. You teach at the Southwestern Area Law School, Kevin.
That's right.
And you concern yourself particularly with just that question, the big studios, the big money, and how they didn't make a dime during COVID. It must have been a really tough time for the industry.
Oh, it was terrible for them because people weren't coming to theaters, as you suggested before, and there was rampant piracy because it's easier to rip off streams than it is obviously to take a film in the movie, which has very bad quality. So because of those two things, the studios decided to move to a streaming model plus release. They call it day and date release. So at the same day we release the movie in theaters, we'll also stream it. Financiers of those movies, most people don't realize that big movie studios don't put up the actual money. There are big companies that do that, such as Village Roadshow. We're very upset about that, and this resulted in a litigation over those rights.
Right. So in other words, usually there's that period, we used to say back in my day, before things go to video. I guess now they go to streaming.
Yes,
yeah,
that's
the window, right?
The various windows.
And how long is the window usually? Is what, 6 weeks or so?
About that, yes. It could vary from film to film, but pretty standard. It's at least going to be over a month, right, before they'll move to the other windows, video on demand, or streaming now, of course, in this market.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that 6 week or so window is when the big money comes in. That's presumably when we have the big box office records set. Is that about
You know
right?
a lot about the industry.
No, I'm just a movie buff, I suppose, and so you always see these records being set. And what you're saying is all of that money just didn't get spent. The Village Roadshows of this world did not make that money.
Yeah, I mean, you have a studio like Warner Brothers, which spent millions of dollars on The Matrix Resurrected. They wanted to recoup some of that investment during COVID. However, they did have agreements in place with other entities who would finance those movies, but those agreements didn't give the financiers a cut of streaming, and therein lied the rub.
Right. And was this just one example, Warner Brothers and Village Roadshow, or were there others?
All of them did it. Sony did it. Warner Brothers did it. But Warner Brothers was certainly the most aggressive, streaming on HBO Max, for example, as well as releasing in theaters. And you might recall that Miss Johansson, the actress, who I believe is
Scarlett?
Yeah, Scarlett, who was with Sony, she also sued, saying, wait a minute, I'm not getting my cut because I too get paid when the movie is shown, as you said, in the box office at theaters. I'm not part of the streaming revenue, and they settled that case, of course, with her. So there were a number of disputes.
Right. What made Warner Brothers and Sony, what made them think that they could get away with it if they had a contract that said, no, you have to show it in theaters?
Well, they didn't think they would be in breach because their contract with the financiers, the people who put up the hundreds of millions of dollars for these movies, is from box office revenue, as you suggested. They didn't contemplate that there would be a streaming world, an alternative world that they could be cut out of. And of course, they were deeply unhappy whether Scarlett Johansson, an actress, or Village Roadshow, a major financier of Warner Brothers movies.
So ultimately, what has this meant for the future? Because presumably there are actually now going to be, there's going to be a little bit more awareness of that when the financiers step up, right?
Correct. Well, I think one lesson we learned is first of all, streaming is a massive piracy issue for the movie studios, something they're still trying to figure out how to do, because you can rip streams and people are very good at that. The other thing we learned is you still need a box office. You still need a movie that is just shown in the movies. That hasn't changed, even with all our technology and all our streaming. You still need people to pay tickets to come see a movie for the movie to be successful, with very, very few exceptions. I'm thinking of Tyler Perry, for example, who goes straight to video, but he has a huge following, he has a cult following. For the most part, it looks like showing movies in theaters is here to stay. So that was an interesting lesson. Technology did not overcome that traditional window.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's for the movies, right? They hope that we still come to the cinemas. So have you also seen some evolution in the way that the cinemas operate as a result?
Well, I think the cinemas are trying to create an experience. You go to the movie for experience. It's different than watching it at home. We all understand that, right? Imagine if Squid Games had, for example, been in theaters, right? It would have had a lot of course, it was a series, right, rather than a single movie.
Yes.
So I think that the traditional window still holds after all this time, that you need to show a movie, get a significant number of people interested, get the press about that, and then when the streaming window opens, people are very excited to see that movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
Were you working in the entertainment industry for, my guess is, at least 5 years?
More than 20 years.
More than 20 years,
Yes.
right? Obviously, you would have seen quite a lot of changes. But one thing that we at PitchMark with our community always find is that there's still some young guns who, just as you started in law, maybe they were just born at that time. They've got a great movie idea and they're thinking, wow, how do I now turn this movie idea into reality? Or do I now send a script to a studio? Or do I find a small independent producer and then they cut straight to streaming and I get all my money online? What's your advice to maybe some of your students who sit with you in law school when they come up with ideas like this?
Well, under our U.S. model, you have to have a copyright registration. That's number one. In Europe, not necessarily, but in the United States, it's essential. The other thing is major studios are not giving money to unknown producers. And so I tell them, you need to learn how to raise money. Everybody comes to me and says, I want to make a movie. And I say, it's not even about the content of the movie. It's your ability to raise money. If you can raise money and you can get eyeballs on your project, you can attract the attention and maybe have that movie picked up by a major studio, as we saw in the days with such movies as the Blair Witch Project, which was just somebody with a shaky camera, right?
Yeah, it was huge. It was a cult in the end.
Ended up being picked up by a major studio. That's probably going to be the model. They're going to have to actually do it on their own first, and then they attract the attention of one of these major studios.
Right. Any other hacks, street smarts that you can share for young guns looking to write scripts and pitching them?
Well, don't send your scripts around willy-nilly because it'll almost, I write about idea misappropriation, idea theft, and there's an idea theft claim a minute in Hollywood because people aren't doing things right. You have to establish the relationship with a producer, with a mainstream actor like Morgan Freeman who can get you to the next level. That's the other thing. Unless you have a major name attached to your project, a Brad Pitt or a Scarlett Johansson, good luck, right? You need that as well. But if you can get that person to get interested, they can get you in the right rooms. But you have to understand there's a risk that your idea is going to be appropriated, and there's very little that you can do about that.
Right.
Yeah.
So is it really that cutthroat that people will just steal the idea without any shame about it at all?
Well, I don't think that the people who do it, and everybody feels they're virtuous, as you know,
Yes.
So they probably don't see it that way, and they could think, oh, well, I already was thinking about something similar, or I had the same idea. And so I don't necessarily say it's predatory, although it is in some cases, but it's just the nature of ideas that people think that if there's an idea, they can add something to it and then it becomes theirs. And that's exactly what happens. Yeah.
So what are some of the themes that you pick up in your writing on idea theft? Do you find that there is also an evolution over the 20 years that you've been in this business?
Well, I wrote an article called Idea Theft as a Hollywood Business Model, which probably gives you an idea of where I come out on this. And I think that the studios need ideas. They can't survive a minute, and television shows as well. You need ideas. Yet ideas are undervalued in our law. They're not protected like copyrights or trademarks and the like. And so really, your only hope is that you can develop a strong enough relationship with someone in the industry who will kind of guide you, mentor you, and not steal your idea. And I know many artists and producers, would-be producers, are very terrified of this very prospect. But if you just stay in your room with your wonderful movie idea or your wonderful script, what's going to happen, right? Nothing. Louis Armstrong said it. What good is sitting alone in your room, right?
Okay, so in the United States, you mentioned the registration of the copyright is important, and copyright.org presumably is the site that you go to if you need to do that.
USCopyrightOffice.org, yeah. Uh-huh.
What about outside of the United States? If, like so many of our members, that you're based in Southeast Asia, again, you kind of dream of, Slumdog Millionaire type of a rags to riches story.
Most of the world doesn't require registration in the ways that the U.S. does. And so you probably have a little bit more latitude, but I think it is a global film industry. And unless you're talking about Bollywood, for example, which is its own thing, almost all roads lead to the United States. And so even with my European friends and the like, I would urge them to do U.S. copy registrations. That can be done, right? It's an international system. Yeah.
And you said to ideally, like the Blair Witch Project, maybe produce it yourself. If you're in the Philippines, you're in Indonesia, Thailand, produce something.
That's really going to be the only route. I mean, Warner Brothers isn't going to hand a new person $100 million, $200 million budget. They're just not going to do that. And you can understand why, right? They're going to go with the same tried and true. The industry is based on blockbuster films, as they call them, or what do they call them? Tentpole films. Mm-hmm. It's one movie can hold up the whole Warner Brothers tent or the whole Sony tent, like Matrix, right? With Warner Brothers. Imagine the money they made from the various iterations of the Matrix. So that's really their model, and then everything else is gravy. If they can find a small film that hits it big, that's good. but they're not going to invest heavily in that, and they're not going to promote it unless they have a reason to. And the reason is that the creator has done the right steps to get the attention to show that this could be a viable project. Yeah.
Finally, Professor Greene, any other key takeaways that budding movie producers, movie writers ought to take into consideration?
Well, some people say don't share your best idea first, because you're probably not going to get a very good deal. Even the creator of Squid Games, you might have read, the Netflix program, he said he hardly made any money on Squid Games because that was his first deal. So ideally, maybe he should have given them another project that was good, but not Squid Games, right? And then on the second go-round, now as he remakes Squid Games, he's going to get paid, right? He's going to have a huge payday. But that's also a lesson that you might consider, a hack.